Okay, guys, so we're going to get a little bit more into the politics and into probably my favorite president to teach is Theodore Roosevelt. And you can see him here on the left, standing alongside his choice, his successor, Taft, who, of course, the fact usually is about Taft. He's the guy who got stuck in the bathtub. So this is day 2 of the Progressive era. And here is Theodore Roosevelt. I'm going to do this. You can see Theodore Roosevelt is ranked 4th here on these presidential rankings. And in the current ranking, he's right there as well. McKinley has been assassinated. He was assassinated by an anarchist. We'll talk about that. And basically, Theodore Roosevelt becomes the president. He's going to be the youngest president, not the youngest president elected, but the youngest ever to take office. And he's looking here at McKinley's policy. He is going to be his own man. And if you remember, Mark Hanna, the campaign manager for McKinley, he'd put Roosevelt in the position of vice president to control him. And now he becomes president, and Hanna actually ends up dying of a heart attack. Some say because of this turn of events, because he could not control Theodore Roosevelt. So he's considered our first modern president, our first 20th century president. And he used the term bully pulpit, and we've heard that a couple of times with recent presidents. And basically, that just means if you think of a pulpit, you think of a preacher, someone who gets the attention of the people. And a bully pulpit is the presidency, where you can use that to affect change. So he's a moderate, but he is a progressive moderate. And he was very, very popular with the people. Very, 6 kids and just full of energy. He's going to have a foreign policy, and we're going to talk about this when we talk about imperialism. And he calls his foreign policy big stick policy. And basically it comes from an old African phrase, walk softly but carry a big stick. And he's going to pass something called the Roosevelt Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. And remember, the Monroe Doctrine said no more foreign colonization in our hemisphere. He's basically going to say, we're going to take care of our hemisphere. So not just no colonization, but no interference at all. His domestic policy is going to be called the Square Deal. And this is kind of the 3 C's of his domestic policy. Corporate regulation, he's going to go after some monopolies, consumer protection, and what he's most proud of and probably best known for is conservation, national parks, forest preserves, animal preserves in the United States. So one of the first regulations that he put into effect had to do with a coal strike. And the United Mine Workers wanted better wages, a reduced workday, and they wanted safer working conditions. The owners refused to negotiate, and that infuriated Roosevelt because people needed coal to heat their homes. So he goes to the owners and he said, you've got to meet with the strikers, with the workers. They refused, and he said, okay, I'll take over the mines. And what he threatened to do is to make all these coal miners members of the military and nationalize the mines. Well, that got the owners' attentions, and the owners consented to arbitration. Remember, we said arbitration is negotiation, and they did get an increase in pay from 10 hours to 9 hours a day, and in response, the owners did raise coal prices on the consumers. So this is a political cartoon, and he is, you can see negotiating. He's the big man in the room. He said, we've got to have this coal. He could have issued an injunction, but he was so angry at the coal owners for not negotiating that he decided to go that other way. He is going to be president when the Department of Commerce and Labor is created to settle disputes between labor entities. Now you're going to have a Secretary of Commerce and a Secretary of Labor. The Bureau of Corporations is formed, and that is going to oversee the railroads, interstate businesses, and to look at the problems with monopolies. The first major company or corporation that is broken up by the Sherman Antitrust Act was a holding company called Northern Securities Company. And this was owned by J.P. Morgan and some of his investors, James Hill, and they had a monopoly in the Northwest on the railroads. So Roosevelt saw this as a bad monopoly, and he is going to break up the company. He gets the moniker, the nickname, as a trust buster. J.P. Morgan was not happy. Love these political cartoons. You can always tell Theodore Roosevelt. Some laws are going to be put into effect to strengthen the Sherman Antitrust Act. One of them was the Elkins Act, and that is part of that Interstate Commerce Act that we talked about earlier. Then the Hepburn Act is going to strengthen the Interstate Commerce Commission. So we still have this in effect today. Federal Express and anything that ships, UPS, anything that ships is covered under this Hepburn Act and the Interstate Commerce Act. One thing about McKinley, he would look the other way on corporations that he thought were doing no harm as monopolies. So he kind of thought there were some that were good and some that were bad, and he differentiated. Okay, another great political cartoon. You can see this is the railroad, and he is breaking them up. He is strong against these, what he considers bad monopolies. Of course, Theodore Roosevelt, known as a hunter, and you can see here he's not killing the good trust, but he's watching them, and he's killing off the bad trusts. So he was watching them, but again, he did let some of the monopolies. They didn't go after them. President Taft's going to be very different. He will, if it's a monopoly, Taft comes from a law background. He was a judge. He's going to be our only president to serve on the Supreme Court. Taft is, and he sees a monopoly as a monopoly, and he's going to break them up if they are a monopoly. So he's going to look at it a little bit differently than Theodore Roosevelt did. So he's letting, okay, you can see this is the standard oil serpents. So he's a snake, he's looking at him, he's in the middle of them, but infant Hercules and the standard oil serpents. Okay. So you can see mergers And mergers, of course, are bringing all these companies together under one large trust. And you can see the period of time from 1897 until Roosevelt takes office, 1900. They spiked. And they're still merging, but it goes way, way down once Roosevelt becomes president. So we talked yesterday about the book, The Jungle, and the meat was bad. Okay, it was nasty. People got food poisoning from this canned meat. Looks like Spam, kind of. Hopefully you watched that video. And Theodore Roosevelt, after reading this book, and he read like a book a day. He was a consummate reader, and he is going to appoint a commission to investigate these filthy conditions. And as a result, these two acts are going to be passed. So now you see government trying to protect the people. This is very different than the laissez-faire government that we had after the Civil War. Actually, for a period of time, for about 40 years. So now, according to the Meat Inspection Act, you're going to have meat inspectors. They're going to make sure the animals are healthy, that the preparation is clean, the shipping is clean. And then the Pure Food and Drug Act, which we still have today, basically you can look at labels and you can see what's in it. Is there a preservative in it? And now we've even gone so far with calories and the percentage of things that are in there that are good for you, calories and so forth. Probably the most important thing that Theodore Roosevelt saw was conserving our natural resources, and he loved the outdoors. When he married rather young, and his wife, with their first child, got ill and died, and his mother died on that very same day. And Theodore Roosevelt ends up going to the Dakotas, and he spends about a year there with the cowboys, and he writes a book, and he goes on roundups, and he just falls in love with that territory. And when he comes back, he keeps this love. And he saw the squandering. He saw the timber companies cutting trees down. The coal mining and so forth. And he wanted to conserve the beautiful, beautiful areas for the future. So he is going to put into effect this conservation policy, and he is going to hire Gifford Pinchot, who was a very important conservationist, and he is going to implement these policies. One of the most important was called the Newlands Reclamation Act of 1902. And this is major rivers, creating lakes, and energy. And he is going to set aside 125 million acres in federal reserves. So this is protecting so much territory. You're going to have, I believe, 7 national parks are going to be created, and this was his pride. You can see him here with naturalist John Muir. Now, he disagreed with John Muir. John Muir wanted these areas untouched. He didn't want, maybe if you put up a tent, that would be okay, but he didn't want roads, he didn't want cabins. Where Roosevelt, being a conservationist, he said he wanted to protect it, but he wanted people to enjoy it as well. In 1904, Theodore Roosevelt is going to run again. Well, he didn't run the first time, remember, he was vice president then. And he is so popular that he is going to win in a landslide. And again, these political cartoons, you can always tell Theodore Roosevelt. And he's got this hat on. Of course, remember, he made a name for himself as a hero in the Spanish-American War as a Rough Rider, which we'll be talking about tomorrow. This one is anti-Roosevelt, showing him as being too aggressive. But election of 1904, you can see Parker takes the South, but Roosevelt takes almost everything in the North and the West. Just again, you're going to have the Democratic South, which has switched. We've talked about that a little bit. So there he goes. The economy suffers. Stock market goes down. Business leaders are blaming Roosevelt for it, but this is again there's not a lot of constraints on the stock market. He's still looking at busting up some of these monopolies, and it is a short-lived panic. But again, that we've talked about that with the Bimetallic Standard. That's going to become an issue again, and the progressives are in full force. Okay, so Roosevelt's going to continue with his policies in his second term, and he has his old friend Taft, who has been the governor in the Philippines actually after the Spanish and American War, come back, and he will be his Secretary of War. And they are dear friends, and so he is going to pretty much handpick Taft to be the next president. So in 1908, Taft is elected handily, and because of the support of Theodore Roosevelt. And Roosevelt, in looking back, he said that was the worst mistake he ever made, that he was full of energy, and that he should have gone ahead and run again for president in 1908. But some people saw that as a third term, and remember, Washington's precedent was a two-term presidency. So it's pretty close to what Roosevelt had. You had 3 states that kind of broke apart and voted for William Jennings Bryan. Remember Cross of Gold speech? This will be the 4th time that William Jennings Bryan runs and is defeated. Taft will serve 1 term as president. We'll talk about that in 1912 election. You can see he's ranked here about 24th. He never liked being president. Shortly after he's elected, his wife dies, and when he was depressed, he ate, and so he ate. he got well over 300 pounds. He will be our heaviest president. You can see he's always had a little bit of weight on him. So there is William Howard Taft there in the middle. And you can see, instead of a 3rd term, you've got Taft serving what they considered Theodore Roosevelt's 3rd term. But Theodore Roosevelt goes off to Africa on a safari, and Taft is doing the job. So he is more conservative, where Roosevelt was more moderate, and he is going to change Theodore Roosevelt's policies, and he is going to go after these monopolies that Roosevelt had left alone, and he's going to make some enemies while he's in office, and when Roosevelt comes back, Roosevelt is one of those enemies. Yes, he got stuck in the tub. So he had a special tub made, and this is the Taft tub, which is now in the Smithsonian, I believe, and I think it's still there. And it used to be that you get 3-4 people in that tub. So he is the true trust buster. Although Roosevelt started it, Taft, he is going to bring 90 lawsuits against trusts. That's twice as many as Theodore Roosevelt did in his 7.5 years. He is one of the big ones was the American Tobacco Company, and they had to reorganize, and then Standard Oil and Rockefeller. And a lot of that had to do with that little lady we talked about yesterday, Ida Tarbell, and her history of Standard Oil. Some of the things that he also passed, he rescued, with his conservation, rescued millions of acres of western mines from coal mining and protected some waterfowl sites. The Mann-Elkins Act, they put not just railroads and people that shipped, but telegraph, telephone, and cable corporations under the Interstate Commerce Commission. And then they put in the postal savings bank system in 1910. Now here's the split. Okay, the Payne-Aldrich tariff. And remember, tariff is always an issue. It's been an issue from the beginning of our government. So this is reducing the tariff was a major goal of progressive reformers. And the tariff, actually, he is going to sign a upward revision of tariffs, and tariffs are going to go up. And this is really going to anger Roosevelt and a lot of his constituents. And then the Secretary of the Interior, remember the Interior does everything outside. Basically, he's going to fire the Secretary of the Interior, and who was kind of a jerk, but that was Theodore Roosevelt's guy, Gifford Pinchot. Remember, we talked about him. And Taft's going to fire him. And when he fires him, this is also going to anger Roosevelt when he gets back. And Roosevelt gets back, he is very unhappy with Taft, and this friendship is going to split. Okay. So Roosevelt, when he comes back, he gives a speech called the Oscillotomy Speech. And remember, we talked about Oscillotomy with John Brown. That was where the massacre occurred prior to the Civil War. But he basically attacks Taft and Taft's policies. Joe Cannon, Louisiana guy, okay, he is he's in charge of the Republican Party, and so he is going to be angry at Taft as well. And things are kind of a mess, and the Congress is going to be Democrats. They're going to lose to the Democrats in those midterm elections. So you can see here, this is the New Nationalism. This is Roosevelt. And the title of this one is The Indian Medicine Show. So you can see Roosevelt is banging the drum. And so what's he setting himself up for? The election of 1912. So this is the split, and here comes the election. And Roosevelt is going to form his own party. It's a progressive party known as the Bull Moose Party, basically because he said he was as strong as a bull moose. So the Republicans, you know, they're old guard. They're saying, well, we can't go away from the sitting president. They're going to take him. So now you're going to have a third party, and it's going to set it up for the Democrats.